Hi, everybody. I'm Kristin Young. I'm the clinical director for Herren Project. Welcome. I'm so glad we have an opportunity to do this tonight. I am sitting here with the reason why we're here tonight is Laura McKowen. I'm very excited.
Hello.
Hopefully a lot of you got the chance to read her new book, Push Off From Here. I would like to show it, but I have a feeling it's not going to show up on my screen.
Oh yeah, the background. Here, I'll show.
Okay. Yes, there we go. Hopefully most of you had an opportunity to read her new book. And if you didn't, I highly suggest you get it. It's awesome. I also thoroughly enjoyed her first book, which is We Are the Luckiest. So I feel very lucky myself to have her here with us tonight. So to start off, I'll tell you a little bit about Laura. She is the author of the best-selling memoir, We Are the Luckiest, The Surprising Magic of a Sober Life, and Push Off From Here, 9 Essential Truths to Get You Through Life and Everything Else. She has written for the New York Times and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, The Atlantic, The Today Show, and more. In 2020, she founded the Luckiest Club, a global sobriety support community. So welcome, Laura. Super excited to have you here tonight.
Thank you. Happy to be chatting with you.
Yes, it's always, I love these, just sitting here and chatting up with everybody. So just so everybody's aware, if you have questions, you can put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I will try to get to as many as we possibly can tonight. You can start putting them in right now. We probably won't get to them for maybe about 15 to 20 minutes, but we will eventually get there. And I'll try to get to as many as I can. So to start off, Laura, I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey that brought you to writing.
Yeah. I had always been a hopeful writer, wanted to be a writer in some sense. Though I never really thought that was possible for me. It seemed like something very mysterious and for other people. I have been a long time journaler. I have all my journals from the age of 9 in a box, and I had started blogs here and there through my 20s and never really kept anything going. And it was when I started to try to get sober in 2013 that I started to write. And I started to write to just figure out what the hell happened and what was going on with me. And it helped me process things and practice having a voice. And I also, like, it gave me something to write about. I don't know if I can write fiction. I've never tried. I've always just written about my own life, but up until that point, it was hard to do that because I had so many secrets. I wasn't very honest. So I couldn't really put out anything substantial. And part of my getting sober was starting to tell the truth about things. And I started to do that really just on a blog that I created that no one was reading. I would sometimes share posts to Facebook or send it out to my email, my small handmade email list. And then slowly over time, I started to build a little bit of a following on social media and a newsletter list. And I started to submit essays to online publications, small ones. And the more time I got in sobriety, the more I started to think that I could really do this become an author. And I started to really dream about writing a book. And it was something that I really wanted more than I wanted to keep drinking. It was maybe the only thing that I wanted more. And so I started to really chase that. And fast forward to 2000, I quit drinking finally in 2014.
9 years ago, you guys, tomorrow. I just want to make sure everyone's
9 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I started to, my writing started to get picked up. I did get published in a few places and started to get feedback on my writing that it was, impacting people, and that felt great. And fast forward to 2017, I got an agent and sold the first memoir in 2018. It came out in 2020, and the most recent book came out in 2023. So a lot of steps in there, but it was really sobriety, trying at sobriety and just trying to find a way through all of that pain and confusion and everything else that got me going.
That's a great story. How was it for you? You mentioned the secrets, right? So how was it for you when you were first starting to share the secrets, especially publicly? Was that scary?
Yeah.
Was it, how was that process for you?
Yeah, I was really careful. I was mostly careful about that. Obviously, I got sober through AA and other things too, but I primarily started practicing telling the truth with other women in recovery. And that was where I really started to share everything. And what I actually put on the page was different. I was aware that I was going through a divorce, and I was aware that there were things that we shared a daughter, and there were things that may not be great to say in the process of a divorce. And I was careful of my family, but overall it felt just freeing to speak honestly, because I hadn't ever really I always had so many different stories going on. And a huge part of my healing was not lying anymore. That didn't mean I said everything to everyone, of course, but I definitely was honest about the fact that I had a problem, and I was very honest about the drinking and what the drinking did to me. And that felt important and good.
You actually talked about that in Push Off From Here, your journey towards telling people, and how you picked people specifically for specific things that felt more comfortable talking to, so it's not that you have to go out and shout everything from the rooftops, right? It's figuring out who you feel safe with to share certain information in, who you think can manage it delicately.
Yeah. And that's really important too, because I think there's this instinct when we work towards getting sober, because we are so tired of lying, that we want to just like get everything out and come clean to everyone with everything. And that there could be a lot of harm in that. I didn't want to do that. The other side of the pendulum is, how am I ever going to talk about any, this stuff, because I have so much shame about it. And so, yeah, picking the answer for me was other people in recovery, other women, specifically for me, other mothers, right, especially because they understood that very specific shame that I had gone through. And they were a safe place for me to talk. But writing was good too. That was, even if it was just for myself, because sometimes I didn't even know what the truth was.
Yeah, very
true. I didn't know. I think we think often that the truth is like, it's a light switch. You're lying or you're telling the truth, and it's much more of a process to learn how to tell the truth. Because for me, and I know for so many others, the habit of lying is so old, and it's so ingrained, and it's so automatic. I mean, when you are lying literally about everything, it's hard to catch yourself. Right. Even just being emotionally honest, like if someone asks you how you feel, I was such a good pretender. It's like, I'm good, I'm fine. Or whatever I needed to say to keep the peace in that situation, or whatever. I was a good manipulator of situations. So even just that can be a tricky question.
Absolutely.
How do you feel? What do you want?
Yeah. And oftentimes I find that when we lie, any of us, not just people who have substance use disorder, we're typically not lying to hurt the other person, right? We're typically lying to protect ourselves. It's about us, not them.
Yeah, almost always. I mean, I started lying as a child to survive the environment I was in, you know, keep parents happy, get my needs met. That's often where it starts. And yeah, usually we're trying to keep something that we feel we need, or protect ourselves from losing something.
And sometimes it is the substance, because it becomes very important when, you know, the brain is ill and addicted, it becomes a very important thing. And this is another thing I think sometimes our families don't always understand. And I'm saying this for the benefit of those of you that are in this situation as a family member, is that for a while, when you're addicted, your brain thinks you need the substance like you need air. So the lies are, we would all lie if our air was being threatened.
Oh yeah.
Right? And that's a lot of the basis for it.
Well, and lies beget lies too.
Oh
You
gosh.
know, you start lying about what you did last night, and you've got to keep that lie going, which requires more lies down the line, and then you can't even keep track anymore. You've got so many different versions of everything going on. But yeah, the lying about the drinking in my case was just, I had to.
Yeah, it was the only way to keep it
Yeah.
going.
Yeah.
Mhm. So I want to hear a little bit about the title. Like, obviously, when, you know, the book explains the title, but I'd like to hear you explain how you came to that title and how you came to that idea of pushing off from here.
Yeah. So it's actually a very straightforward story. That the first AA meeting that I went to, first 12-step meeting, was in 2013. And I only went because my back was against the wall. I write about this in my first book, but I had gone to my brother's wedding and left my daughter, who was 4 years old at the time, alone in our hotel room overnight. It was just me and her staying in there. And I put her to bed and left and didn't come back because I was in a blackout. And I woke up somewhere else the next morning. She made her way to my family, thank God, that next morning. And I only went because it was now out. You know, people were watching me. My parents were watching me, my brother, potentially my ex-husband. And so I only went to that meeting because my back was against the wall. So I went in there, as everyone does, mortified, afraid, not knowing what was going to happen, not wanting to be there. I was a trembling mess. And it was a very small meeting. It was only like 12 people or so, all women, downtown Boston. And I didn't know how meetings worked. And I didn't know that it was going to be, with only 12 people there, we were all going to say something. It was like a round robin type of situation. And when it came around to me, I vomited all this stuff out about what had happened and why I was there, and my daughter, and it was awful. But one woman afterwards came up to me, and she kind of grabbed my shoulders and like squared herself to me and said, "Hey, I'm a mother too. And I want you to know you can leave that all behind. You can push off from here." And I never saw that woman again. I don't know who she is or was, but I remembered those words, push off from here. And they carried so much for me, because I did not stop drinking at that point. I drank for a whole year after that, and it got darker and darker. But I realized in that time that I was not going to be able to stay sober by just beating the shit out of myself and shaming myself. And push off from here felt like grace, but it also felt like definitive. Like you have to take a step. You have to push off. You can't. It was both an invitation to come back, and try again. And also, you have to go from here. And for me, you know, for almost everybody I've ever talked to who has gone through addiction, you cannot face all the past stuff right away. You just can't do it. And for me, it was somewhat permission to put that aside for a little bit and just take the next step that I needed to take to stay sober. And that I would deal with all that when I could, but it lessened the weight of all that regret and shame just enough so that I could like take another step and do what I needed to do.
Right. That's awesome.
And then it became like a thing that I started to say to people.
Right.
And so by the time the book, you know, I was writing the book, it was sort of obvious that this should be the title, because people responded to me saying it to them the same way I responded to that woman saying it. It really, like, they got it.
Yeah. I mean, I love the concept of it. Like, I love the idea of that. And another thing you discuss in the book that I've always felt very strongly about is this idea that you have to start over. Right. So when we talk about, I like to call it reoccurrence of use, but you know, the old term relapse, and how that means that you're resetting the clock back to day one. And that makes no sense to me. I understand why the community has used that. I get it. But I just don't think that that's fair to do to somebody, because it actually keeps people sometimes using. Right.
Oh God. Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk for a minute about that, because I love that. And I also wanted to say before we move on, how much I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, especially in We Are the Luckiest. And for those of you that haven't read it or have loved ones that are struggling, it's a great place to start, because a lot of people don't realize that this isn't unique to them. Making poor decisions is not unique to them, and that you can still, it's okay. Just own it, right? And then move forward. So I know that was two questions in one, so I'm sorry, but
I got you. I got you. Yeah. I hate the word relapse too. I've never used it. I don't know why. I didn't have any reason for using it or not using it. I just have never liked it. I've never called myself an alcoholic, because it never, like, there was an over identification with that for me. I know some people find it necessary and they like it and they need it. I don't. I say I don't drink anymore, you know, and I definitely had a thing and have a thing, and I'm very clear that I can't drink, but you know, I think the conversation around the words you use have a lot of power, and the relapse word for me, I don't like it either. So just +1 on that. And then the day count is it's so interesting, because I also get the importance of marking a date where you've been clean and sober since. I get that. But I had been so demoralized by resetting my clock after a year that I decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. And I just stopped counting days. Like, I knew when my last day was, but I deleted that day count app from my phone because it haunted me. And I couldn't, like, I knew the last time I drank, it had been like, I don't know, 17 days or something like that. And I'm like, I can't go back to day one. And it also didn't make sense to me either, because that year between 2013 and 14, I drank less than I had in the past 15 years. I had maybe 20 days, 25 days where I drank alcohol, as opposed to 365 days, which was where I was.
Yeah.
And that was like, that had to count for something. Okay. But the model, the mental model that we sort of work with, it didn't matter as much as that time since your last drink. And so my thing is just do what works for you so that you're gonna get the momentum that you need, but just be honest about it.
Right.
I don't think you should lie and say my date was this, and because that doesn't work either.
Right. Yeah.
Be honest about it, but do what works for you.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about that in chapter 5, which I absolutely loved.
Okay.
How you talk about, I also like how you talk about doing the work. I'm actually going to read one of the quotes. I have it bookmarked. It's from Veronica Valley. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And they say all humans are called to this work. It's just most people don't answer the call. But when you have a substance abuse problem, it forces you. And I love that. I think
Yeah.
I use it too.
Yes.
Going forward, I'm going to take it with me.
Yes.
Because I think that's such an important piece, right? So when we're talking about substance use disorder and people who are struggling with substance use, it is an all or nothing thing in a lot of our minds, especially as family members. And I think we have to look at it like a journey, just like we're all on a journey as humans. We all have pain. We all do some dysfunctional things, maladaptive coping skills, to use the big terminology, right? And substance use is one of those maladaptive coping strategies that we as humans use when we're in pain. So if we can actually, I think, boil it down to looking at what the actual problem is instead of the symptom, right? It makes a lot more sense. And I think it's a lot easier to digest as the person struggling, that they're not alone in this. They're not the only bad person in the world that's making bad decisions. Because even those of us that don't have substance use problems are still not always making great choices, right? And we all have pain and it's all the same journey. But when you have a substance use problem, you just blow your life up a lot faster.
Yeah. And it manifests in some really gnarly ways. It's not great to be with or experience. It does cause a lot of wreckage. But yeah, it's in my first book, I say, like, we all have a thing. We all have many things. This particular thing, alcohol, was one of mine. And I don't think it's that special or unique. It's definitely not uniquely terrible, but we have it still very much on a moral, it's a moral issue for a lot of people, or a lack of control issue at least. And that you just can't overstate how problematic that is for the people who experience it. And on top of that, alcohol specifically is such a mind F because of how our society and culture holds it. And we don't even need to get into all of that, but like that makes it an especially
Uh-oh, I don't know if this is me or her. One of us froze.
sober, and all their family members and all their friends around them drink very heavily and still, and are unwilling to look at their own usage. There's no other substance like that.
Absolutely. Well, marijuana is becoming it, unfortunately.
Yes.
Not to the same degree as alcohol. Absolutely.
No, because there's still a social taboo around marijuana. You're not doing it at every airport and every restaurant and every party, and there's still a taboo.
Yep.
So anyway, I could go on that whole tangent, but we don't need to.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to talk about, because when I run support groups with families, especially around the holidays every year, I do bring this up, because I think as a family member myself, having gone through it and been on that side of it, I had to ask myself, how important is alcohol to me? Right? And what's more important to me, my loved one's sobriety or my alcohol? And I often point out to families, if your loved one's sobriety is really important to you and you're still choosing alcohol, and I think you mentioned this before, but I think I might have froze for a second. But then you have to look at yourself a little bit and ask yourself why, right? And this isn't judgment. There's no judgment involved in this. It's just looking at yourself, right? And understanding, because it is, I mean, alcohol is pushed down your throat. And in We Are the Luckiest, you talked about this, how, and I use this with people when I'm working with them now, how you felt like you were being voted off the island.
Yeah, well, you are.
The island of fun,
The
right?
island of fun, the island of intimacy, the island of dating, the island of connection, the island of, yeah, you're just, you have to leave that island for a while. And people, we are so diluted in our culture when it comes to alcohol that people don't even really consider, they don't, unless you have people stop and really think about alcohol and where we hold it in our culture, how we think about it, how banal and good we think it is until it isn't. You know, it people, it's so embedded, so deeply embedded, that you have to really get people to stop and slow down and think about it. Like using the marijuana example, I have a friend who recently was so upset. She came into like a dinner with a group of us, and she was like, I'm so, like, we were just talking about different stuff in our community, and she's like, I can't believe it, but these parents of, she has a son, of her son's friends' parents were smoking weed at a party in front of all the kids. And the kids were like 9, 10. And I was like, but everyone was drinking, right? She's like, yeah, but think about that. Weed is legal here. Why is, and we're all drinking at, while we're doing, I'm not drinking, but we're having dinner and people are drinking. And she was like, oh my God, that's true. But still, she couldn't get there in her mind because it's so different.
Right.
No one thinks anything of the parents that were sitting there having drinks with the 9 and 10-year-olds. So that's why it holds such a weird, ubiquitous place in our culture. And that, to the person who is trying to stop, to, like, our number one need as humans is to be connected, to each other, to belong. So it's the idea that the deep fear that you are no longer going to belong to anyone that you once belonged to, like, imagine how painful that is at a very primal level.
Well, especially since for a lot of individuals, they first started to feel like they belonged once they found alcohol, right?
100%. For me, it was like that. It's like, oh, I found the magic thing that puts me in, and that makes this comfortable, and that makes this okay, and makes me, it's like the magic key. And then, no.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem is it works really, really well until it doesn't.
It
right?
works really well. And not only do you have to experience that sort of exclusion from what you once belonged to, but you have to do that without any anesthetic. You have to do that now sober, and that's not taking away from the responsibility that people have when they do put people in pain, because there is that too. I don't mean to paint, me or anyone else who goes through this as a victim. There is the aspect of taking responsibility, but I think since there are families here and loved ones here, you can't discount how challenging that is.
Yeah. But I think it's important for loved ones to understand that, because oftentimes, and again, I'll speak for myself in my own journey, the anger that I had and the resentment had me saying things and doing things myself that didn't feel consistent with who I was or who I wanted to be. Right. So it's a matter for us of recognizing that your loved one is in pain and dealing with a sickness. Right. And we have to learn to protect ourselves based on our own boundaries. Right. And that's a hard journey. It's very difficult for a lot of us to understand that. But you didn't wake up one morning and want to hurt everybody you love. That's not how it works.
No. Right. No one would choose to be addicted ever.
No, that's definitely, and I think it's, like I said, I think it's important that we have that discussion. And this is a lot of what we talk about in our support groups, is learning how to put up the boundaries, how to still love your loved one and support them while keeping yourself safe. Right. And a lot of it is very.
I mean, I'd say it's like the two different addresses in hell, like both,
Yeah.
they're both terrible. I've been on both sides, and I have total compassion for our families and friends that go through that. I have been there. It is just a different address in hell. They're both very hellish places to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also just wanted to, and then I'll get to the questions that we have from
Yeah.
our participants, but I just also wanted to say I went to a conference, to the Mobilize Recovery Conference last week in DC, and the Partnership for Drug-Free America was there and did a presentation. And the clinician that, unfortunately, her name is escaping me right now, but the clinician that did the talk I went to suggested we stop saying drugs and alcohol. She said we
Yes.
start saying substances, because we're separating alcohol even in how we talk about it, and it's a
Yes.
substance like all the rest.
It's a drug. Full stop.
It
Yes.
is.
I
So
totally agree with that.
that's I'm trying right now to substitute my language from drugs and alcohol, and I'm starting to use substance use or
But
substance.
that's a great example of how different it is. How different it is. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to get to questions.
All
So
right.
science has been a bit of mental salvation for me. I use it a lot when talking to people about addiction. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Side note, I heard it in a meeting, relapse described as a flat tire. You don't throw the car out, you get the tire fixed.
Mm.
Oh, I like that.
Science has been a bit of a mental salvation for me. I use it a lot when talking to people about addiction. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm curious what they mean.
I'm guessing I'm a brain person.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm guessing they might be talking about how the brain, when you're in active use, your brain is literally hijacked by your sort of emotional impulse center in the middle of your brain that can't think consciously. So the outside cortex of your brain is basically shut off. So
Okay.
like, that's what I'm guessing that we're doing.
So to explain the process of addiction and the impact of addiction and the experience of addiction, they use science to sort of communicate on it because it's objective, know, or it's the most objective ground we can kind of communicate on. I mean, I do too. I love all the science. I love all the information. I love that so much more has come out in mainstream media in the past 3 years. Still not enough, but there was a Lancet report that came out that in 2000, it's now a while, 17, I think, that said the safe amount of alcohol is none. And I'm just talking about alcohol. I know that there's other substances, but yes, the I love it too. And no one can really argue with, well, some people can, but it's
People do, but
probably the most objective way to talk to people about the experience of addiction and what's actually happening to a person. I do find though that some people still can't hear it when it comes to if they still have addiction on as a moral issue, or just they haven't experienced anything that has put them out of their own depths, they are never going to understand it. Whether you're talking about science or they will not understand it until they experience something like that themselves. That's right. Just the way it is, and that has to be okay. So I don't try to reach people that can't be reached. The ones that I think need that, the families and friends are the ones that I think are the most open and willing to hear things. And sometimes science is helpful. It depends on what kind of learner or what kind of person you're talking to. I mean, I needed to hear the emotional side of things and to be heard about my emotional experience, right? But
yeah. And I do think I think where it becomes really important is in recovery, because the first 6 months to a year, the brain hasn't reset yet. So oftentimes people feel no joy, no pleasure. And to know what's happening, that this is a biological process that's happening. I think it's important for us as family members to know this.
Yeah.
And for, people struggling, it's not forever, but it is for right now. And we're humans. We're driven by pleasure.
Yeah. We want to
So
feel better.
that's a really hard thing when you finally are like, okay, well, I'm not using, but now I feel awful all of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That it does help when talking about recovery, because it's so much, it goes for so much longer than you think it should often, the lights don't come on for a while.
Oh, you mean it's not over in 3 to 5 days of a detox?
I never had a pink cloud, okay? I was like, what are these people talking about?
I
That is
know.
not.
It happens, but I think most people do struggle. I think we should give everybody the opportunity to have 120 days in treatment. Not that everybody needs to stay that long, but they should have that opportunity because a
Yeah.
lot of people need that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay,
Oh,
next one. Oh, from my friend Nelson. Hi, Nelson. My question is, what advice would you give family members who are trying to navigate the balance of being a supportive parent or sibling while respecting the challenges of addiction being faced by the child/sibling? Then he says, thank you. Thanks to both of us.
I'll let you start with that while I
Okay.
process it.
Okay. So I think, the first thing that we have to do as family members is learn, and I said this before, is learn to protect ourselves. So we have to start to ask ourselves, because I think as family members, whether we're a sibling or a parent, typically we'll get into a place with our loved one's illness where it's, what do they need? And that's all we think about. And that's what we obsess about, because we are literally addicted to saving them. And there's actually a study that is coming out of the University of Texas Tech, or Texas Tech University, that is showing that the same part of the brain for loved ones lights up when they think about their loved one getting into recovery as the person addicted. Brain lights up when they think about their drug of choice. So we literally become addicted, which I think explains a lot, because there's a lot of kind of crazy stuff we do when we're trying to save our loved one, right? So the first thing is to cue into ourselves. What do I need here? Because what I've seen over the years is that not protecting ourselves and not figuring out what we need and not setting the appropriate boundaries around that leads us to walk away. And that's the last thing that our loved ones need.
Because you get so, it's like the exploding doormat type of thing, where you don't do anything, and then you just can't do it anymore.
Exactly. So if we learn to cue into ourselves, and a lot of this work is done in one-on-one therapy, figuring out what things you won't tolerate anymore from your loved one and coming up with the boundary that you're setting with the consequence. It always has to have a direct consequence, right? And Nelson knows I talk a lot about boundaries and consequences. So that way you can stay in to be a support. And as for support, I think being a support is asking how your day was, as opposed to have you used, right? I think the support is, can we go get a coffee? Just please show up, not obviously intoxicated, right? Not making everything about the substance and the substance use all the time. Because really, from what I hear, I'm not in recovery myself, but from what I hear from my community, there's a lot of people in my community that are in recovery, is that they just need us to be there and to love them. And they a lot of times also need us to protect ourselves, because most of the time our loved ones don't want to hurt us. So when we do that, we're actually protecting them as well. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or anything to add.
No, I would say that's all 100% true. And you articulate that better than I ever could. I haven't spent as much time on the other side, and don't feel even equipped to speak to it. Really, I can talk, what worked for me. The people that said something to me, family, friends, and especially those who said, I love you, but I won't do this anymore. I won't drink with you anymore. I won't co-sign this anymore. I won't lie for you anymore. I appreciated that. I hated it, but I appreciated it. And then just, yeah, knowing that the part about it not always being about, have you drank? Are you drinking? Are you, how's the sobriety? And just, how are you? What's going on is really good. I can't imagine having my daughter's 14, and I don't know, I don't know what I will do come the time if we ever have to face this. So I can't really speak to the parent-child thing, but I can't imagine how difficult that would be. But I would say probably the same things apply. It's just you need extra support. You need support.
100%. I mean, as a parent of a 17-year-old who recently started vaping a little bit, and I found out, I wanted to ask him every second of every day, did you vape? Did you vape? Did you vape? Did you vape? And yeah, that's my anxiety, right? But that's for me to feel better. That's actually not what's helping him. So I have to take space from him and really think through, even though I teach this, when I'm emotional, right? It's really hard to do the right thing. Well, there's no right and wrong here, but the best thing, or what I know would work, because I'm too emotional, right? So this is hard. So I never want any of you guys that are struggling with this to think that you're bad, or you've done something wrong, or you know better, or all the things that go through our head, because the reality is this is really hard.
Oh my God. Yes. Second address in hell type of hard.
Yeah. So next question is, are you working on another book now? And if so, when will it be out?
I am working on another book. It's about relationships, and it's a memoir. I'm going back to memoir, and it's really about when I got sober, I realized that the thing underneath the thing for me was dysfunction in relationships and sort of attachment issues, and it manifested in a lot of really unhealthy behavior when it came to men, and romantic relationships and all of that. And that was like a second sobriety that I had to go through. So it's all about that. And it'll be out sometime in 2025. That's the best guess I have.
Okay, well, I can't wait to read that. That's a very common theme.
Yeah.
Recovery is that the love, sex addictions start up when the substance use starts to wean off, which actually makes sense. Again, the geek in me, the neuro stuff, it makes sense in terms of the brain and dopamine and all of that.
Yeah. You're like, I can't do that, but I'm going to do everything else. And it also is such a, like, it seems like the most natural, normal thing. Of course we should have relationship. Of course we should have love and connection and all that, but it can get real dysfunctional real fast.
Yep. So this is not a question, but a congratulations for you. This individual their 8-year sobriety date, and they've been following you throughout their journey, and they've been sober but not necessarily recovering, and that is the current goal. So attending the session is a gift. Aw.
Oh, that's congratulations on 8 years today. We have our my sobriety date is tomorrow, so we're 1 day away.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Oh, I have a good one, the last one.
Okay.
On truth telling and motherhood, how did you decide how much to share with your daughter and when? How did that change when you became more public with your journey? Mom in recovery of 2 teenagers here. I said this was a great one, even though I never have great answers for this. So my daughter was 5 when I got sober. She's 14 now. So we went from her, 5 and 14 is a huge difference. I have been very open with her from the beginning, meaning she's been privy to conversations where I talk about being sober she used to go to meetings with me. She has known from the very beginning that this is a thing that I do or don't do, as it were. And I, for a while, I would be very kind of heavy-handed about trying to tell her that alcohol was bad and dangerous. And I realized like that doesn't work with anybody, but it really doesn't work with kids. And so I remember this piece of advice that I got when I had her, which was from another parent, that was only answer the question asked.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started to let her ask questions and answer the ones that she asked, because kids do ask questions. If they feel safe, they will ask questions. And so she would ask, maybe when she was 9 or 10, what happened when you drank too much? Like, what did it feel like when you drank? Why did you keep doing it when it didn't feel good? And I would answer those questions as honestly as I could for an age appropriate way. I wasn't telling her I was waking up in, strange men's beds, but that I would do things that made me really sad and that I regretted and that weren't who I really was. So that only answer the question asked has been good. The other thing is I genuinely do feel like they watch us more than they listen to us. And so just being a sober mom who has a whole life and who socializes and feels all kinds of feelings and has a job and does everything without alcohol, that maybe she says the rest of the world has alcohol when they socialize or when they do whatever. I think that's the best thing that I can do versus trying to talk to her about it. I will always answer her questions, but I've also just tried to create a relationship where she feels safe talking to me. I don't try not to make a big deal out of things, like, because with teenagers especially, like, they don't want you freaking out about everything. It's just like, oh, cool, yeah. How do you feel about that? What do you think? Type of stuff, treating her like a whole person. She knows that I am public about this. She has been to my book events now. She told me that she read my first book while I was at a book event. I don't know if that was true. So there's no like one size fits all answer, but I do believe that being a living example of recovery is the best thing that you can do versus anything you could say.
I completely agree. And I, as somebody who's not in recovery, I actually didn't drink around my son, and I still don't. Don't really drink often anyways, but I felt it was important for me, especially since his father had a substance use issue. It was important for me to let him see that fun doesn't require alcohol, right? Because that is a big issue I feel like we have in our society, is that fun is equated with alcohol. And if there's parents out there that are freaking out right now because they didn't do this, don't freak out. Like, just make sure that you're aware of it going forward and have open and honest discussions about the fact that, if your child is a teenager, that you're worried about them associating fun with alcohol, and just discuss it. But
Yeah.
I love the idea of only answer the question asked. And I want to piggyback it with, if they're asking, they're ready to hear the answer. Right. So that's another important thing. You don't want to push these questions off, because then you're leaving them to come up with an answer on their own. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where the honesty comes in.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great add-on.
Yeah. And we have another question actually, about how you approached your past with alcohol with your daughter, and what advice you would give to a mother parent, being a child with a mother who drank heavily during my childhood, thus being a thing in my life. She's 36 now, and now on a sober journey for herself, 40 days sober today. Great job. And of course, Laura, you've been instrumental. She started in 2020 addressing their alcohol use. They appreciate you, your words, and your crusade to be open and honest about your experience.
Well, first of all, amazing 40 days sober today and working towards this and since 2020, which means you have done a lot of work. I would just repeat the same things that I just said. You get to be a living example of recovery. One thing I didn't say that I do say to her is, it's not a foregone conclusion that you have to drink because you become an adult. Like, there's totally the option not to. I think I certainly thought that was just the natural progression of things, and she was like, huh, yeah. I mean, she says today, I don't want to do that. I'm not interested in that. And I'm like, well, that could change. And if it does, that's okay. You can tell me about it, that's the other thing is I think when they sense that we have this deep anxiety and fear about it, that isn't great either. So, just to be as honest as you can in an age appropriate way. I mean, there's not a whole lot I wouldn't share with Alma now, except for maybe like the sex stuff that is not great for, she doesn't need to hear that, but she knows that I put her in danger. She knows that I did lots of things that I regret. She knows that it made me very, very sad and full of shame. She knows that I did things that I could never take back, and I think just keep going is the absolute best thing you can do.
Yep, absolutely. So when we know our loved one is desperate for connection, but they continually lie to protect their substance use, how do we offer connection to them and set a firm boundary? I don't want to beat them into sobriety, but love them. But I worry continuing that connection allows them to feel safe to keep using. That's a great question. I going to take it back to kind of what I said earlier about figuring out what you won't put up with anymore in your presence and setting a boundary with them around that. So if you no longer want them to be intoxicated around you, that is a very clear boundary to set. And then you have to figure out what the consequence will be for that, which for me would be I remove myself, because you can't ask them to leave. Typically, it just doesn't work like that. Usually your consequence has to be more something that you're going to do because you have no control over the other person. So that something around those lines would be my suggestion.
And the lying is like, I don't know what you do about that, because they know that they're lying. If it's a situation where they're clearly intoxicated and they're lying and saying they're not, I mean, that's a clear boundary where you can say, no, I'm removing myself from the situation because it's a boundary. But if it's just, lying in a conversation like, no, I stayed sober all week, and they're lying for some reason, I don't know what you do about that.
So what we usually talk about in groups is assuming that your loved one is going to lie if they're actively using. And letting them know that they're not being truthful all the time, and that you might not and that their word is becoming less valuable, but not arguing over the specific lie.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're never going to get anywhere if you're arguing with an intoxicated person over whether or not they're intoxicated, or with somebody used a substance last night, but they're not owning it. That never gets us anywhere. So instead, just be like, listen, I know that you're not being truthful with me. I don't know exactly when, and I'm not going to give you specifics, but just know I know, and it's wearing on me, and this is becoming really difficult. And I'm, not sure what I'm going to need to do, but I need to do something to protect me. Something along those lines, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And also just assuming, because I feel like a lot of the times it hurts us because we think that our loved ones are lying to us because they don't respect us or they don't care about us, and it's not about us. So just knowing that they're lying is related to their stuff, not anything about us.
Yes.
And assuming that if they're actively using, especially, and they have a substance use disorder, you have to assume they're going to lie instead of having it take you by surprise.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. We can probably take a couple more. Do you want to read the one on from Anonymous on binge drinking? Do you see that one?
Yes. Any thoughts on issues relating to binge drinking rather than daily drinking? I am functioning and sober on a daily basis, but will almost always go overboard on the occasions when I drink. So what I have said and learned is that it doesn't matter how much or how often you drink, but what happens when you do. Some people binge drink and only on the weekends. I had a friend who only drank, she drank once a month. She binged, she had PMDD, and it was like raged out of control, and she would binge and black out for a few days once a month, and thought she couldn't possibly have substance use disorder because it looked like that. So my thoughts are, substance use disorder doesn't look like a certain number of days a week, certain number of drinks a day. It is what happens to you when you drink. And I would say binging is problematic for you, I'm imagining, if you're here and asking. So my thoughts are that no one can tell you what is a problem for you, but there is no, it needs to be a certain number of days a week. There's no measure like that.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And then we had somebody who mentioned the 9 things. So maybe we got 3 minutes left. Do you want to talk about the 9 things?
Sure. Yes. So the 9 things are what Push Off From Here is about. And they came up because in 2016, a woman wrote me a letter and said that her sister was struggling with drinking, and that she had been for a long time, and she was afraid of losing her sister to the addiction. And she was going through all the things that people go through when someone they love is stuck in addiction. She was sad and frustrated and angry and scared and all of those things. And she said, I don't know what to say. I don't want to scare her away. What would you have wanted to hear? And so I wrote her this long letter. And at the end of the letter, I said, like, if this is too much, just give her this list. And I listed all the things that I would have wanted to hear. And they are: 1, it is not your fault. 2, it is your responsibility. 3, it is unfair that this is your thing. 4, this is your thing. 5, this will never stop being your thing until you face it. 6, you can't do it alone. 7, only you can do it. 8, I love you. And 9, I will never stop reminding you of these things. And those became the epigraph to my first book. That little, like, before you read the book, there's sometimes a little quote or a little piece of prose to start the book. And those were the epigraph to my first book. And people would ask me about about those 9 things, you know, even though there was a whole book there, they were very curious about those 9 things. When 2020 hit, I started a sobriety community called the Luckiest Club, and decided that at the end of each meeting, we would read these 9 things. And I switched 8 and 9 a little bit so that it wasn't I love you. It was you are loved. And 9 was we will never stop reminding you of these things. So it was a collective thing. And it became clear over the years of running that community that people really gravitated towards those things, but they wanted to know what they meant, like more than just the lines themselves, and how could they actually practice them. And so that's why Push Off From Here was written. It's an exploration of those 9 things. But Angela says, I like that they can be used for not only substance abuse, for anything that we're up against. And I like that too. And I've heard that a lot. So I'm glad that you find them helpful.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to read my favorite part.
Okay.
Okay, and just so we can end it on this, but when I read this, it literally brought tears to my eyes. And I think it's so amazing. So Laura says, so yeah, it is unfair that this is your thing because life is unfair, yes, but also because you don't deserve it. This isn't happening because you're a broken, bad, weak, selfish piece of crap or whatever self-punishing thing you think. This happened because it happens. It just happens. You didn't ask for it and you aren't being punished, but it is yours. If no one has told you yet, let me be the first. I see you. This sucks. And I'm so sorry you're going through it. Your pain is valid and your sorrow is real. I understand. I know. I mean, I really, really know. Okay? So breathe and then do it again. Let's keep going. I love that. It takes the stigma out of it, right? It's like, yeah, so this is your thing.
Yeah, it happens.
And it sucks. And it does
Yeah.
suck. And I say that to every person I work with. It sucks that this is your thing.
Yes, it
And
sucks.
so I want to thank you for this book, Laura. I think this is a gift to not only the recovery community, but to all of us. And I hope that as many people as possible read this book. And I know I'm suggesting it left and right
Thank
to
you.
not just my recovery community friends, but to my families and to people who aren't touched by substance use.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing this and for asking such great questions. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions asked.
Yes.
That's
We'll have to do it
thank you
again.
for asking them. Yeah. No, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming and being here.
Yeah, and I want to send thank you to our community as well. I appreciate every single one of you for coming and being, asking such great questions and just being a part of our community. So thank you, Laura. It was so nice to see you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.